In the golden age of Hollywood, when stars were sculpted like marble statues and every gesture was calculated for maximum impact, one woman dared to break the mold with volcanic fury. Katharine Hepburn, four-time Oscar winner, Connecticut. Aristocrat, and Hollywood's most untamable force, shocked an entire film set when she did something that would become legendary. In the middle of a crucial scene, with cameras rolling and careers on the line, she turned to her personal acting coach and delivered two words that would echo through cinema history. "You're fired." What happened in that moment would reveal the true nature of Hollywood's greatest rebel and the price of artistic integrity in a world built on compromise. Long before Katharine Hepburn became Hollywood royalty, she was a force of nature, tearing through the drawing rooms of Connecticut. High society like a hurricane in silk stockings. Born into privilege on May 12, 1907, young Kate Houghton Hepburn possessed something that money couldn't buy and finishing schools couldn't teach. An unbreakable will that would either make her a star or destroy her completely. Her father, Dr. Thomas Hepburn, was a respected urologist who challenged social conventions, while her mother, Kit, was a suffragette who fought for women's rights with the same ferocity that would later define her daughter's career. Little did the world know that this combination of intellectual rebellion and social defiance was creating a powder keg that would explode across movie screens for decades to come. At Bryn Mawr College, Katharine's professors witnessed something extraordinary, a young woman who refused to be contained by expectations. She smoked cigarettes when ladies weren't supposed to, wore pants when society demanded skirts, and spoke her mind when women were expected to whisper sweet agreements. Her drama teacher, aware that he was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, once said she possessed the kind of raw talent that could either illuminate stages or burn them down. When she graduated in 1928, the theater world had no idea what was coming. Her early performances on Broadway weren't just acting. They were declarations of war against mediocrity. Critics either loved her with passionate intensity or despised her with equal fervor. There was no middle ground with Katharine Hepburn, and that's exactly how she preferred it. The stage trembled beneath her feet, audiences held their breath, and casting directors whispered about the redhead who could command a room with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a perfectly timed pause when RKO Pictures signed Katharine Hepburn in 1932. They believed they were acquiring just another pretty face to mold into their vision of feminine perfection. How catastrophically wrong they were. From the moment she stepped off the train at Union Station, wearing men's trousers and carrying herself like she owned the entire city, Hollywood executives knew they had invited chaos into their carefully controlled paradise. Her screen test for a bill of divorcement opposite John Barrymore was the stuff of legend. While other actresses trembled before the great stage actor, Hepburn treated him like an equal, perhaps even a rival. Director George Cukor watched in amazement as this unknown newcomer matched Barrymore intensity beat for beat, creating electrical tension that practically set the film stock on fire. She doesn't just act, Cukor would later recall. She conquers every scene she's in. But conquest came with a price. Studio executives, accustomed to starlets who followed orders without question, found themselves dealing with a woman who questioned everything. Costume fittings became battlegrounds. Script readings turned into philosophical debates. Publicity shoots resembled diplomatic negotiations between hostile nations. The truth no one dared to say was that Katharine Hepburn was too intelligent, too independent, and too dangerous for Hollywood's assembly line approach to stardom. Her early films showcased both her brilliance and her volatility. Morning Glory earned her first Oscar, but behind the scenes, she was already developing a reputation as difficult, demanding, and utterly uncompromising. Finally revealed decades later, studio memos from this period painted a picture of executives torn between admiration for her talent and terror at her unpredictability. They had created a monster, a beautiful, brilliant monster who refused to be caged. By the late 1930s, the honeymoon was over. Katharine Hepburn had committed the ultimate Hollywood sin. She had delivered a string of box office disappointments while refusing to change her approach. Theater owners across America famously labeled her box office poison, a devastating verdict that would have ended most careers. But Katharine Hepburn wasn't most actresses. The label stung more than she would ever publicly admit. Here was a woman who had conquered Broadway, earned an Oscar, and commanded respect from the industry's greatest talents, suddenly reduced to a cautionary tale about the dangers of artistic integrity. Studio executives who once courted her now avoided her calls. Directors who had praised her genius suddenly discovered they were pursuing other options. The isolation was crushing, but it was also liberating. Little did the world know that this period of professional exile was forging the woman who would eventually become cinema's greatest survivor. While other stars might have compromised their vision or retreated to obscurity, Hepburn did something remarkable. She bought her way out of her RKO contract and returned to Broadway. The move was seen as career suicide by industry insiders. But it was actually the most brilliant strategic retreat in Hollywood history. On stage, in the Philadelphia story, she didn't just rehabilitate her reputation. She rewrote the rules of celebrity comebacks. Playing Tracy Lord, a character that seemed tailor-made for her specific blend of vulnerability and steel, Hepburn reminded audiences why they had fallen in love with her in the first place. But more importantly, she retained the film rights, ensuring that when Hollywood came calling again, and they would, she would be negotiating from a position of absolute power. And Katharine Hepburn decided to work with renowned acting coach Mikhail Chekhov in 1941. The decision raised eyebrows throughout Hollywood. Chekhov, nephew of the famous playwright and a disciple of Konstantin Stanislavski, represented everything that old Hollywood feared: intellectual depth, emotional honesty, and a systematic approach to craft that threatened the industries. Preference for instinct and star power. But Hepburn, fresh from her Broadway triumph and preparing for her return to films, was determined to push her artistry to new heights. She had always been a student of human nature, dissecting characters with the precision of a surgeon. But Chekhov promised something more, a method to channel her natural intensity into even more powerful performances. Their early sessions were electric. Chekhov, a man who had worked with the Moscow Art Theater's greatest talents, found himself challenged by an American actress who refused to accept any technique that didn't serve the truth of the character. She questions everything, he confided to friends, and then she finds ways to make my methods even better. The truth no one dared to say was that their partnership represented a collision between two massive egos, each convinced they held this key to theatrical perfection. Hepburn respected Chekhov's knowledge, but bristled at any suggestion that she needed fundamental changes. Chekhov admired her instincts, but believed that proper technique could elevate her from a talented amateur to a true artist. The stage was set for an explosion that would rock the foundations of both their careers. When MGM agreed to film The Philadelphia Story in 1940, they weren't just buying a successful play, they were surrendering to Katharine Hepburn's demands, in a way that would forever change how stars negotiated with studios. She had insisted on script approval, director approval, and co-star approval. She wanted George Cukor behind the camera and Cary Grant and James Stewart beside her. Most shocking of all, she demanded that Mikhail Chekhov be present on set as her personal acting coach. The arrangement was unprecedented. Personal coaches were usually dismissed once filming began, relegated to private rehearsals and preparation work. But Hepburn had written into her contract that Chekhov would be present for every scene, available to provide guidance and support whenever she needed it. Studio executives agreed because they had no choice. The Philadelphia story was Hepburn's property, and she was calling every shot. From the first day of filming, tensions simmered beneath the surface of what appeared to be a perfect production. Cukor, one of Hollywood's most respected directors, found himself in the unusual position of sharing authority with a Russian acting teacher who spoke in philosophical riddles about psychological gesture and emotional memory. Cary Grant, ever the professional, adapted with characteristic charm, but privately wondered if the set was becoming too crowded with competing voices. Finally revealed in memoirs published decades later, crew members recalled the strange dynamic that developed during those early weeks of filming. Hepburn would deliver a performance, then immediately turn to Chekhov for approval before even acknowledging Cukor's direction. The coach had become more than an advisor. He had become a security blanket for a star who had never needed anyone's validation before. As filming progressed on the Philadelphia story, the fundamental differences between Mikhail Chekhov's European approach to acting and Hollywood's results-oriented system became increasingly apparent. Chekhov believed in extensive preparation, emotional archaeology, and psychological truth. Above all else, he encouraged Hepburn to dive deeper into Tracy Lord's psyche, to find the wounded woman beneath the sophisticated exterior. But Hollywood operated on speed and efficiency. Every day of filming cost thousands of dollars, and elaborate psychological preparation was a luxury the system couldn't afford. George Cukor, despite his respect for both Hepburn and Chekhov, found himself caught between artistic idealism and commercial reality. "We're making magic," he would tell friends, "but magic has a schedule." The breaking point came during a crucial scene between Tracy Lord and her ex-husband, played by Cary Grant. Hepburn had been working with Chekhov for days on the emotional subtext, exploring Tracy's feelings of abandonment and her fear of vulnerability. They had created an elaborate backstory involving childhood trauma and family dynamics that went far beyond anything in Philip Barry's original script. Little did the cast and crew know that they were witnessing a fundamental clash between two different philosophies of performance. Hepburn, influenced by Chekhov's teachings, was seeking psychological truth even at the expense of the scene's dramatic effectiveness. But the character of Tracy Lord, as written and as the movie needed her to be, required a lighter touch, wit and charm, rather than tortured introspection. The method was serving the actor, but failing the story. The day that would go down in Hollywood legend began like any other. It was the third week of filming the Philadelphia story, and the production was running smoothly, despite the underlying tensions between artistic vision and commercial necessity. Katharine Hepburn arrived on set at dawn, as was her custom, already in character and ready to work. Mikhail Chekhov was at her side, carrying his leather portfolio filled with notes, observations, and suggestions. They were preparing to film one of the movie's most important scenes, Tracy Lord's confrontation with Mike Connor, the reporter, played by James Stewart. It was a moment that required delicate balance. Tracy needed to be vulnerable, but not weak, wounded, but not broken. George Cukor had blocked the scene carefully, positioning the actors to create maximum emotional impact while maintaining the sophisticated comedy that made the story work. As Hepburn prepared for her first take, Chekhov approached her with a small piece of paper folded in half. Those close enough to observe would later recall that his expression was unusually serious, almost concerned. He whispered something in her ear, handed her the note, and stepped back to his position behind the camera. What happened next occurred so quickly that many witnesses would later disagree on the exact sequence of events. Hepburn unfolded the paper, read the contents, and her face transformed. The composed, confident actress disappeared, replaced by something raw and dangerous. She looked from the note to Chekhov, then to the assembled cast and crew, her famous blue eyes blazing with a fury that seemed to electrify the very air around her. The silence that followed, Katharine Hepburn's reading of Mikhail Chekhov's note, lasted only seconds, but those who witnessed it would swear it felt like hours. Then, like lightning splitting the sky, her voice cut through the tension with surgical precision. "How dare you?" The words weren't shouted. They were delivered with the controlled fury of a woman who had been betrayed by someone she trusted. Chekhov, perhaps realizing that his note had crossed an invisible line, attempted to approach her with his hands raised in a gesture of peace. But Hepburn stepped back, her posture transforming from vulnerable actress to commanding general. The entire set, crew members, fellow actors, studio executives, watched in stunned fascination as Hollywood's most independent star prepared to do something unprecedented. "You're fired," she declared, her voice carrying to every corner of the soundstage. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, and for a moment, nobody moved. Mikhail Chekhov, the respected teacher who had worked with theatrical legends across Europe, had just been dismissed by his student in front of dozens of witnesses. The humiliation was complete and public, exactly as Hepburn had intended. Finally revealed in interviews given years later, several crew members recalled that the note contained a suggestion that Tracy Lord should show more feminine weakness. In the scene, a recommendation that struck at the very heart of everything Hepburn represented as both an actress and a woman. Little did the world know that this single piece of paper had challenged not just her artistic choices, but her fundamental identity as a performer who had spent her entire career refusing to diminish herself for anyone's comfort. In the immediate aftermath of Mikhail Chekhov's dismissal, the Philadelphia story, set became a study in professional tension and personal drama. George Cukor, faced with the unprecedented situation of his star, publicly firing her own coach, mid-production, made the decision that would define his reputation as one of Hollywood's greatest directors. He supported Hepburn completely and continued filming as if nothing had happened. Cary Grant, ever the consummate professional, approached Hepburn during a break and offered his quiet support. Whatever that note said, he was reported to have whispered, "I'm glad you stood up to it." James Stewart, newer to Hollywood's power dynamics, but instinctively understanding the significance of what he had witnessed, simply nodded his approval and prepared for the next take. But the real drama was happening behind the scenes. Studio executives, initially panicked by the public nature of the confrontation, quickly realized they were witnessing something historic. Word spread through Hollywood with lightning speed. Katharine Hepburn had just demonstrated that she wouldn't compromise her artistic vision for anyone, not even a respected teacher. She had personally chosen to guide her. The truth no one dared to say at the time was that Chekhov's dismissal represented more than just a personal conflict. It was a declaration of independence from the very idea that anyone could tell Katharine Hepburn how to be a woman on screen. Little did the industry know that this moment would inspire generations of actresses to trust their own instincts over external authority, no matter how distinguished or well-intentioned that authority might be. With Mikhail Chekhov gone, and the set buzzing with nervous energy, Katharine Hepburn had to prove that her dramatic gesture had been more than just temperamental theatrics. The scene they were filming, Tracy Lord's emotional confrontation with Mike Connor, became a test not just of her acting ability, but of her judgment as an artist who had just rejected expert guidance in favor of her own instincts. What followed was nothing short of magical. Without Chekhov's psychological methodology weighing down her performance, Hepburn found the perfect balance between vulnerability and strength that the scene required. She delivered Tracy Lord's lines with a combination of wit, pain, and resilience that captured everything Philip Barry had intended when he wrote the character specifically for her. The performance was spontaneous, authentic, and absolutely mesmerizing. George Cukor, watching from behind the camera, knew he was witnessing something special. Years later, he would describe that take as the moment when Kate stopped being an actress playing Tracy Lord and became Tracy Lord herself. The crew, still processing the drama they had just witnessed, found themselves applauding spontaneously when Hepburn finished the scene, finally revealed in the memoirs of those present. A consensus was unanimous. The performance that emerged from Hepburn's artistic rebellion was superior to anything she had delivered under Chekhov's guidance. She had proven that sometimes the greatest teachers are wrong, and sometimes the student knows better than the master. The truth no one dared to say was that Katharine Hepburn had just demonstrated why she was destined to become one of cinema's greatest legends. News of Katharine Hepburn's dramatic dismissal of Mikhail Chekhov spread through Hollywood like wildfire, creating ripple effects that would be felt for decades to come. Other actresses, many of whom had been struggling under the weight of coaches, directors, and studio executives who tried to mold them into predetermined shapes, began to whisper about the possibility of artistic independence. Joan Crawford, known for her own battles with studio authority, reportedly called Hepburn to express her admiration. Bette Davis, never one to shy away from controversy, publicly praised her colleagues' courage in a newspaper interview. Even Greta Garbo, the industry's most enigmatic star, was said to have nodded approvingly when told the story during a rare social appearance, but the most significant impact was on the emerging generation of performers who were just beginning their careers. Actresses like Ingrid Bergman and Olivia de Havilland would later credit Hepburn's example as inspiration for their own battles for artistic control. The lesson was clear. Talent combined with courage could overcome any institutional pressure. Little did the world know that this single moment of rebellion was helping to plant the seeds that would eventually blossom into the modern concept of actor as artist rather than commodity. Studio executives, initially nervous about the precedent Hepburn had set, gradually began to realize that stars who felt creatively empowered often delivered their best work. The old system of absolute control was beginning to crack, and Katharine Hepburn had struck one of the first decisive blows. To truly understand why Katharine Hepburn's confrontation with Mikhail Chekhov became necessary, we must delve into the psychological complexity of a woman who had built her entire identity around refusing to be anything other than completely authentic. From her childhood in Connecticut, surrounded by parents who encouraged independent thinking, to her early struggles on Broadway, every experience had reinforced the belief that compromise meant death, artistic, personal, and spiritual. Note that triggered her explosion represented more than just artistic disagreement. It was an attack on the very core of who she was as a performer and as a woman. Chekhov's suggestion that she show more feminine weakness wasn't just about the character of Tracy Lord. It was about centuries of expectations that women should diminish themselves to make others comfortable. For someone who had spent her entire career fighting those expectations, the suggestion was intolerable. Friends who knew Hepburn well understood that beneath her confident exterior lived a perfectionist who demanded more from herself than anyone else could ever require. She, Hadri Triclod, can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.